I'm a 27-year-old male, and I live in the UK with my fiancé. I currently work as a teaching assistant for teenagers with special needs in a school not far from Bradgate Park. I've worked in a number of schools and children's homes now, and these buildings, especially the children's homes, are usually old renovated houses or halls. This story happened in 2013, when I had just started working as a support worker at a care home for teenagers and young adults, 18 to 30 years old, who had autism, brain damage, and challenging behavior. The house that I worked at was pretty big. There were 2 living rooms, a large kitchen, a games room, a study, and 5 bedrooms. There was also a huge garden with a summer house, an activity room that led to acres of fields and woodland. I had been working there for about 3 weeks, and primarily worked the waking night shift. This shift ran from 10 p.m. until 8 a.m., and it was my duty to make sure all the residents were settled for the night, and then get the cleaning done before the day staff came in to take over. I would usually get all my jobs done at around 1 a.m., and I'd spend the rest of the night listening to anyone that woke up. I would watch TV, read my university course textbooks, or just play some games on my phone once I was finished. The residents usually slept all night. On one particular night, a young man named James, not his actual name, was particularly restless. He was not very big, but he had a lot of strength behind him. One time, he got into one of his bad moods, and he threw a member of the staff through a patio door because she'd forgotten to put cold water in his tea before he drank it. He could not form full sentences, and would communicate with fairly simple words put together in a way that he understood. For example, he would say something like, "James make breakfast," when he was ready to make breakfast, or "James go outside," if he wanted to go out and play. He was generally well behaved, and could be quite funny when he wanted to be, but he was known for his temper. At around 11 p.m., James got up and came downstairs to make a drink. I stood in the doorway and watched to make sure he didn't break anything or hurt himself, and then he went back upstairs without any real bother. I sat on the top step and kept an eye on his door for maybe 15 minutes to make sure that he didn't wake any of the other residents. Once he had settled, I went back to my cleaning. The room beneath James's bedroom was a communal living room with board games, a TV, sofa, books, and stuff like that. I was in there dusting and mopping the floor when I heard something drop in the room above. I knew James was prone to temper tantrums if he got frustrated, so I went up the stairs and knocked on the door. As I reached for the key to open it myself, he opened the door and looked at me. He seemed perfectly calm, and his eyes must have been half shut, like he'd been asleep. I asked if he was okay. He said yes, and put his thumb up. This was something he did when he was in a good mood and not stressed out, so I left him to it and told him to be careful, thinking that he had knocked something over by accident. An hour passed, and by then, I was in the kitchen cleaning the sink. I heard another big bang above me, again like something had been dropped. This time I realized that the room above the kitchen was currently empty. The house had been set up for 5 residents, but there were only 4 at the time, and the room above me was the spare. I immediately went to check it out, but the room was empty. I stood there for a while, and as far as I could tell, everyone was asleep. Due to their conditions, each resident had an alarm fitted to their door that was activated at night. That way, if anybody left their room, a small receiver box would sound an alarm. The night staff carried around the box, and it made a little noise to indicate which door had been opened. The alarm had not gone off, so I knew that the noise was not from any of the residents. I got back to my cleaning and didn't hear anything else for the rest of the night. The following night, I got to work just before 10, and as I entered the hallway, I could tell that something was wrong. James was at the bottom of the stairs, covering his ears and humming loudly, and 3 members of the staff were with him. After a few minutes, he was escorted to the sitting room, and the house manager gave me a rundown of what had been going on. For the last 4 hours, James had been quite agitated and kept repeating the phrase, "Sarah, little girl," when he was asked what was wrong. That was something we'd never experienced from him before, and the general conclusion was that he'd seen something on TV or in a movie that stuck in his head and made him repeat the phrase. Once James had settled in bed, The night staff left, and the other members of staff went to the staff bedroom. I got on with my tasks, and as usual, I finished around 1 a.m. Soon after, I went upstairs to do a quick check of the other residents. When I got to the first floor landing, I noticed that the light had been turned off. There were 2 small corridors leading to the bedrooms, on the left and right side of the staircase. James's room was on the left side, and the light switch was just outside his room. I turned the corner to flick the switch, and there in the darkness, in complete silence, was James. He stood in the corner, with his eyes as wide as he could possibly hold them. I'm a big guy, 6'3", and I weigh about 220 pounds, but in that moment, I was really creeped out. I spoke calmly to James, and asked him what he was doing. For a while, he said nothing at all. Then, as I turned the light back on, he let out an ear-piercing scream and started slapping himself around the face. The sleep-in staff woke up and helped me to calm the situation and get James back into bed before reassuring the other residents that everything was fine. After that night, I had 4 days off. My shift pattern was 7 days on, 2 days off, followed by 8 days on and 4 days off. I was relieved that the incident happened just as my time off began. I got back to work the following week and was told that the situation with James had gotten a lot worse. He would spend hours staring at the window that overlooked the garden, just saying, "Little girl, where are you, little girl?" We still didn't know where he had heard that phrase. That night, at around 3 a.m., the alarm went off to say that door number 5 had opened. That was the spare room. That instantly seemed a bit weird, because the door to the spare room was always locked. I went up to investigate and found James standing in the room, in the dark. He didn't seem to notice me and just stood there whispering, "Where are you?" over and over again. I gently touched his shoulder and said something like, "Come on, mate, let's get you back to bed. It's late." James turned around and started heading back to his room, and for a second, I was relieved. But then, as I locked the door to the spare room, he screamed out, "Oh no," and started pummeling the door with both fists. When he did this, the alarm went off to indicate that the front door had been opened. The only people with a key to the front door were myself and the house manager. The door has 4 locks on it, 2 that require a key, and 2 that require an electronic ID card. It was now 3:25 in the morning, and the manager never came in before 8 a.m., so I presumed there must have been some kind of mistake. I stayed with James and continued trying to defuse the situation. He finally calmed down and went back into his room. I went downstairs to check the front door. To my surprise, it was wide open. I shut it immediately and started checking every room in the house in case someone had gotten in. I then checked on each of the residents to make sure they were all still in the house. Everything was fine. The next night, everything was calm until around 2 a.m., when one of the other residents, Connor, got up and said that somebody was tapping on his window. I thought he must have been dreaming, because his room was on the 3rd floor of the house, and it was at least 25 feet from the ground. I went back up to his room to reassure him, and checked his window. Sure enough, it was shut, and the security lock was still sealed. As he got back into bed, I heard footsteps on the stairs outside his room. He froze for a second, and looked at me with an expression of pure panic on his face. I opened the door to see what it was, but there was no one there. He was clearly scared by this, and said, "Is he back?" My blood ran cold, and asked, "Is who back? What do you mean?" Connor looked over my shoulder, and then sank into his bed, pulling his duvet up to his mouth. I turned around to see what he was looking at, but there was still no one there. "Tell him to go away," Connor said in a hushed, scared voice. I tried to reassure him that there was no one there, and then left his bedside lamp on before leaving the room. I went downstairs and sat outside on the patio with a cup of coffee. It was the middle of January, and it was around -2 outside, but I felt I had to get out of that place for a while. After around 40 minutes, I went back inside and washed my cup in the sink. I dried it and then put it back in the cupboard. Beneath the cupboard was a locked drawer, which is where we kept all the sharp knives. The drawer was slightly open. This was obviously a major issue, because none of the residents were allowed to access the knife drawer without supervision. I counted the knives and realized that there was one missing, so I woke up the sleep-in staff and told her the situation, then we began to search. Nearly 2 hours later, we still hadn't found the missing knife, so we decided to just keep our guard up and make sure none of the residents were hiding it. 2 hours later, at 5:30 a.m., the alarm sounded. It was the door to the spare room again. We went up to check it out and found out that the door was locked. How could the alarm have been activated by the door opening if it was still locked? I went inside and turned the lights on. To this day, I have no explanation for what I found. The bed had been pushed from its usual place. It was against the wall, and the wardrobe doors were open. There were screws and nails all over the floor, but nothing was broken. The most disturbing part, though, was that in the middle of the room, there was a children's doll, a gold bracelet, and the missing knife from the kitchen. The doll was an old-style baby doll. My guess is that it was made in the 50s, from the style of the clothes and the overall look. The bracelet was simple, but old-looking. I left everything as it was and reported it to the manager as soon as she arrived. No one ever claimed that the bracelet belonged to them, and it was soon taken to a charity shop along with the doll. After the doll and bracelet were removed from the house, James seemed to calm down and never mentioned the little girl or stood in the dark again. I still don't have an explanation for everything that happened. Sometimes I think it was just a combination of strange behavior from a young autistic guy and the fact that the house was old. But on the other hand, a lot of the stuff that happened can't be explained logically. My only regret now is that the doll and bracelet are gone and can't be examined or identified. Maybe it was paranormal, who knows. But now I work day shifts, and I don't plan on working the night shift again anytime soon. The night shift at the gas station was always quiet and uneventful, but that's what I liked about it. I was the only one working, and I had the place to myself. I would stock the shelves, clean the floors, and wait for the occasional customer to come in. It was the perfect job for someone like me who enjoyed the solitude of the night. But tonight was different. The weather was terrible. A raging storm was sweeping through the area, and the power had gone out. I was stuck in the gas station alone after dark. I tried to keep busy, but the silence was deafening. All I could hear was the muffled noise from the heavy rain. As the storm raged on, I started to hear strange noises coming from outside. I tried to ignore them, but they were getting louder and closer. I could hear something scratching at the door, and I knew I had to investigate. I grabbed my flashlight and slowly made my way to the door. When I opened it, a gust of wind blew in, drenching me in rain. I couldn't see anything in the darkness, but I could hear something breathing heavily. I froze, not sure what to do. And then out of nowhere, a figure burst into the store. I stumbled back and fell to the ground. I was sure I was going to die. But as the figure got closer, I managed to get a look at him. All I could see was a dark outline, but it was a man. A giant of a man. He was at least 6'5" with wild hair and a bushy beard. He wore a large coat, but even without it, I'm sure he would have been huge. I scurried behind the counter and sounded the alarm, but I knew help was minutes away, and I didn't have minutes. I scanned the place for the guy, but I lost him. I could hear him though, and his movements sounded close. I knew that I had to find a weapon, something to defend myself. I found a baseball bat and brandished it in front of me. The man let out an amused laugh and lunged at me again. I swung the bat with all my might, and it connected with him and made a sickening thud. He let out a final cry and fell to the ground motionless. I couldn't tell where I got him, but I didn't want to stay and find out. I ran out of that place and down the street. I was drenched in rain in less than a minute. Suddenly, I noticed the flashing red and blue lights that I'd been waiting for. It felt like an eternity since I'd called, but looking back, I know it was probably less than 5 minutes. I walked back to the store to meet the police. When I got there, my attacker was gone. I turned over the surveillance footage to the police, but since the power was still out, we couldn't watch it on the spot. However, the police were never able to find the guy. I was lucky to have escaped with my life, but I know that I'll never be the same again. The memory of that night will haunt me forever, and I'll always be looking over my shoulder, wondering when the man will return. I quit my job at the gas station and never went back. I've been a security guard for over a decade now, and in that time, I've seen some strange things. But nothing could have prepared me for the night when this story took place. It was 2018, and I was working the night shift at a hotel downtown. The job was really easy. I was really into sci-fi books at the time, and I had a lot of time to read. There was a security office at the back of the building, which is where I spent most of my time. Other than that, I would do a few patrols of the building and the parking lots every few hours throughout the evening. It was a typical quiet night at the hotel. I was making my rounds, checking doors and windows, when I heard a loud noise coming from the parking lot. At first, I thought it might be a car backfiring, but as the noise continued, I knew something was wrong. It was 2:30 in the morning, and the place was an absolute ghost town. Any noise at all stood out like a sore thumb, so those loud thuds I was hearing in the parking lot were very concerning. I immediately called the police, and then headed towards the source of the noise. As I approached the parking lot, I saw a figure in a hoodie trying to break into a car. My heart was pounding in my chest as I shone my flashlight at him, and I ordered him to stop. As soon as I got those words out, he took off running. I chased after him, my breaths coming in gasps as I tried to keep up. I just needed to stay with him long enough for the police to show up. He was fast, and I was starting to lose ground when he suddenly disappeared. I stopped and shone my flashlight in every direction, but I saw no sign of him. Just when I thought I lost him, I heard a faint noise coming from a nearby alley. My hand went to my weapon, which was a can of pepper spray, as I cautiously approached. That's when I saw him. The man was hiding behind a dumpster, trying to catch his breath. I ordered him to surrender, but he refused. He came at me with a wild look in his eyes, and then he jumped on me. Before I knew it, we were rolling around on the ground fighting. I was cursing myself for following this man. I should have waited for the police, I thought. The man was strong, but I was able to overpower him and subdue him until the cops arrived. The man turned out to be a wanted felon with a long history of violence and theft. It's been a few years now, but I still think about that night. The feeling of fear, the adrenaline rush, and the physical struggle with the criminal will always be part of me. I'm grateful for the training I received, and I know it helped me handle the situation as best I could. But I also know that being a security guard is more than just making rounds and checking doors. It's about being prepared for anything, and being able to handle dangerous situations, rare as they may be.